Metaxis, or the transition between worlds and the consequences for education. Metaxis, or metaxy, is the word used by Plato to describe the condition of in-betweenness that's one of the characteristics of being human. In particular, Plato applied it to spirituality, describing its location as being between the human and the divine. Whelan expands the notion of metaxis further, claiming that we humans are suspended on a web of polarities, the one and the many, eternity and time, freedom and fate, instinct and intellect, risk and safety, love and hate, to name but a few. Metaxis has also been defined as the state of belonging completely and simultaneously to two different autonomous worlds. So the notion of humans passing through an interface between the world of ideas and the physical world is over 2,000 years old. Plato also came up with the notion of the forms. In the Republic, he puts forward the idea that what we see in the real world is not in fact real, but the things we see mimic the real forms, which live in a place we can't reach. He likened this to reality being a shadow play on the wall of a cave. We all live in the cave and can't get out of it, and we experience reality only through the shadows of the real forms that we can't see directly. I think it's uncanny how much resonance there is between that idea and what we now can do in virtual worlds. But which one is true reality? In this tutorial, I'm going to argue that the advent of virtual worlds has provided another interface we can now inhabit, that between the virtual and the real. And particularly that the notion of in-betweenness becomes significant when virtual worlds are used for education through simulations of physical world experiences and activities. So we can simulate in simultaneous worlds. Both of those words have the same basic etymology, from the Proto-Indo-European base sem or som, meaning the same. And that leads us to ask some interesting questions. How much are physical world and virtual world experiences the same? Can or should we extend the use of simulation in education? How effectively does learning transfer between those worlds? And what kinds of pedagogies can we develop for students traditionally classed as distant? Let's look at some of those questions more closely. Let's look at simulation first. The idea of simulation being used to promote learning isn't new. This is a simulated horse used to train new cavalry recruits during the First World War. Training with real horses used up valuable resources. Simulating flying experiences for new trainee pilots isn't new either. And later mechanical devices like this articulated plate replaced the human components of flight simulators. And then the cockpits became much more sophisticated. And now there are full simulations available as games and in virtual worlds. And medical simulations are also widely used for training nursing and clinical staff. And now the interface between virtual simulation and the physical world can be undertaken without the need for a manual interface at all. The development of virtual worlds now enables the creation of easily constructed and affordable simulated physical environments and social situations in which students can take part in a way that mimics their likely activities in the physical world once they're qualified. This affords particular benefits when those environments and/or situations are unethical or dangerous or impractical to experience pre-qualification. If learning about the physical world can be simulated in the virtual world, the transferability between learning in the physical and virtual worlds, or learning permeability of the interfaces between those two worlds, becomes a significant issue. As an example of the relevance of the interface between physical and virtual worlds, this diagram will unfold to describe the activities undertaken by students carrying out a simulated accident investigation and risk assessment exercise in both the virtual world and the physical world. To carry out the exercise, the students needed to take what they'd learned about risk and accident causation theory, inspection and interviewing techniques from the physical world, apply that knowledge and the understanding of the theory during the investigation exercise in the virtual world, then take what they found from the virtual world and apply analysis techniques like fault tree analysis in the physical world. As a result of that analysis, go back into the virtual world to further investigate, to interview other members of staff in the simulated organisation, and then come back into the real world to write reports, discuss the accident and its causes, and reflect upon what consequential action they might take. As the students worked through these exercises, it became clear that the virtual world activities took on an increasingly real feel for them, as you'll see from the results of the evaluations we did with them. First, some notes about the methods we used, though, to carry out the evaluation of both the accident investigation and risk assessment exercises. The evaluation included an assessment of the students' immersive tendencies to investigate possible associations between the learning permeability of the interface experienced by students and their innate tendency to get immersed in virtual activities. The evaluation was carried out by application of the Immersive Tendencies questionnaire at the beginning of the module, and a questionnaire and CAFE-style focus group at its conclusion. The conclusion questionnaire tested the construct of the students' opinions of their learning outcomes in relation to the virtual world exercises, together with feedback on their experiences and prior expertise in the use of IT. The CAFE-style focus groups concentrated on wider issues of their learning in the module as a whole. We also observed the students in their activities in the virtual world and carried out a comparison of the marks in the risk element of the module with their marks in the rest of the module. The evaluation data was analysed using non-parametric statistical methods for the learning outcome construct, as this was tested using Likert scales. The experiences part of the questionnaire and the outcomes of the focus groups were analysed using descriptive statistics. Then we triangulated the results of 1, 2 and 3, and we commented on the analysis of element 4. So what did we find? Well, we found that the students agreed that the physical world information was useful in the virtual world, that they could carry out analysis of virtual world findings effectively in the physical world, and that they could successfully apply theory they'd learned in the virtual world in the physical world. We also found that there was little correlation between how successful they felt their learning outcomes had been with their sense of competence using IT. This came as a significant surprise to us, as we thought that the less IT confident students would experience less successful learning outcomes. But we did find that there was a significant correlation between their immersive tendency and their sense of success in learning, particularly amongst those who expressed a preference for virtual world learning as compared to classroom learning in the physical world. When we carried out the marks comparison, we found that the marks for the risk element that incorporated the virtual world exercises were about 8% higher than for the rest of the module. But one word of warning here though, it's notoriously difficult to compare marks for different activities meaningfully, as there are always other variables that might be having an effect. The risk element was taught by a different tutor, for example, and although all marks were moderated by internal and external examiners, small differences are always likely to occur, and it can be difficult to assign all the difference to one variable, in this case the use of a virtual world simulation. But having said that, the marks comparison is persuasive when we aggregate it with the other findings. The narrative feedback was analysed using a conceptually clustered matrix technique. And just as a way of demonstrating the most commonly occurring themes, I put the narratives through a word cloud generator too. And here's what came out. I haven't tinkered around with this at all. All the narrative responses went into the word cloud, and this was the result. Word clouds aren't reliable methods of narrative analysis, and I'd only show you this if it agreed with the results of the fully analysed data, and it does. The phrase "like real life" that pops right out at you here is exactly what resulted from the full analysis too. I'm just going to round off this tutorial with a comment about distance learning and the changing role of physical location as it relates to the idea of learning interfaces. For thousands of years, if we wanted to learn with or from others, that meant having to be in the same place at the same time. This famous picture demonstrates the well-known problems with that method, the sage on the stage and the mass in the class. Some are paying rapt attention, some are chatting to their mates, and some are nodding off. Despite those drawbacks, there was really no alternative, and the methods persisted well into the modern day. The advent of information technologies has brought about a profound change in the way we can share and interact with information. But even then, the loneliness of the long-distance learner, this chap's doing a traditional correspondence course whilst at sea in a submarine, has been hard to break down. But virtual worlds can at last give us the opportunity to change the nature of distance education and to bring together learners with a sense of presence who inhabit the interface between the physical and the virtual, happily and freely between both. There's no doubt it's early days for virtual worlds, but the opportunities they offer could turn around the whole notion of learning at a distance and close that so important transactional distance too. Thanks very much for listening.